Welcome to Taste of Truth Tuesdays, where we'll be serving up bite-sized conversations on all things fitness, nutrition, mindset, and spirituality. So grab your headphones and get ready to taste the truth with us every Tuesday. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform because every bite counts. Hey, welcome back to Taste of Truth Tuesdays. Today, we're diving into something that touches all of us. Literally, the clothes that we wear, the fabrics that we trust, and even period products that women rely on can carry hidden chemicals that affect our health. And it's not just about toxins. We're going to be talking about the bigger picture, like the cultural stories that taught women to hide what's natural while normalizing what's harmful. My guest today is Arielle Loupos, the founder of Flower Girl, which is a brand reimagining period panties with natural, breathable fibers, no toxic coatings or weird gimmicks, you know what I mean? But we're going to talk so much more than period panties, so please don't tune away. I'm excited because we're going to talk about textiles, which are the invisible dangers of fast fashion, a little bit of the history behind them, and most importantly, what we can do. So some takeaways, some actionable items that we can do to reclaim comfort, safety, and most importantly, sovereignty over our own bodies. Just before we get into the interview, I want to say that in the podcast episode blog, there's all the links. Anything I mention in the episode, it will be linked in the blog. So be sure to check that out, tasteoftruth.com. And it's not a letter, it is a number 0. And I wanted to talk about the brief history of poisonous fashion, and I have some fun photos in the blog. So all the way back into the Victorian era, which is one of my favorite times to research and to, I don't know, like a typical girl. This was green dresses. They were laced with arsenic, and mercury-based pigments were very common. So it was like rashes and lung damage, potentially death. In the early 1900s, then we were shifting into the Industrial Revolution. Factory workers, they were handling lead and dyes and formaldehydes and stuff like that. And then we have the synthetic fabrics, which came about in mid-20th century. So nylon, polyester, which was, promising convenience and comfort. But the chemical coatings for stain proofing and wrinkle-free finishes and the flame retardants are adding a new layer of invisible toxins. Of course, we fast forward to today, and the modern toxic trends are going to be the plastic fibers, the microplastics that are getting into the waterways, PFAS, forever chemicals, which we talk a lot about today, heavy metals, and other things. And I have some more information in the blog if you want to deep dive into some of the most publicized cases that will show you how pervasive these risks are, guys. I mean, there's more than 40,000 chemicals used in textiles and apparel, but only a fraction of them have been tested for safety for humans or animals or to the environment. So we have the Thinks period underwear, which we talk about at the end of this interview. And so there was independent testing that revealed PFAS were in these period products, and they were marketed as organic and clean, and so that's where the deception was. There's also some crazy information, all linked in the show notes, that flight attendants' uniforms from Alaska, Delta, and American were making people sick. We're talking rashes, respiratory issues, thyroid problems. And then outdoor and athleisure brands like Patagonia, Lululemon, and REI have been scrutinized for the PFAS in their waterproof and sweat-wicking gear. And she mentions in the interview about a 2024 study from U.S. Berkeley and Columbia that found 16 different metals, including lead and arsenic, in tampons. And we're talking organic and non-organic brands. So this is not a small issue. This is an issue that women are facing. We're already looking at where toxins are coming in from our food, from our water, and so now we're talking about clothing. And so without any further ado, let's kick off the interview. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, Arielle. Can you just kick it off, introducing yourself? I know you didn't start out in textiles or manufacturing. So what made you care enough to actually start building the solution instead of just shopping around for a better one? And just introduce yourself to the listeners so we know who we're getting to chat with today.
Thank you so much. And yes, so my background, I've actually spent the last 10 years in e-commerce. So I very naively went into product development. I always had an itch that I wanted to do something of my own. And, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I spent a lot of time curious about what problems I was having in my own life. And as a woman, we menstruate every month, typically. And I really hated the disposable products that were available to us. So I found period underwear and I thought it was the best option for managing my cycle. I loved it. However, I still was like, this quality, there was a bit of discomfort there. It was super thick and padded. And I ultimately also, I live in Los Angeles. So I wanted to take advantage of producing something domestically. I produced the product here in LA. And I really just started the journey of like asking around, talking to connections in my network who were in manufacturing and production. And I spent hours, driving around downtown LA, meeting with people. And then I started producing samples. And the more that I learned also about textiles, right? Like the fabrics for literally everything that we wear, it was so fascinating to me because I learned one, how unfortunately toxic a lot of these textiles and mass produced fast fashion items, clothing that, we don't even think about, we take for granted. And that was like another area that was really fascinating to me. I didn't want to just, order products off of Alibaba, slap a label on it. Alibaba is a fast producing China where you have access to China manufacturers for anyone who doesn't know. And, I really wanted to create something of quality of my own. So I was like, I'm going to produce it here in Los Angeles. I am going to learn as much as I can about textiles and source like the best possible fabric because I want to be able to market this product as non-toxic. And the reason that was important to me is because something else I learned on this 2-year journey of research and development was, unfortunately, how little research there was on the products that we as women have been using our entire lives. So, ironically enough, the middle of my journey in 2024, the first study ever came out on tampons, and they found lead and 30 different other toxic chemicals in the products. And I was just absolutely shocked. And that was in organic and non organic samples tested. So, unfortunately, there's not a lot of regulation around what manufacturers have to put on these labels for the products that we're wearing. So that was something else I really wanted to bring awareness to with this product in particular.
Yeah, this has also been a part of my journey as I got really sick with COVID in 2020, which activated all sorts of susceptibilities I must have had underneath the surface. And
Mhm.
so digging myself out of that hole has been very holistic, and I've already been a super hippie, crunchy, eating organic since
Yeah.
2003, like, for real, back in college before it was cool, and I was studying dietetics and was already starting to see how much of the revolving door, like, a lot of my schooling was sponsored by high fructose corn syrup, Coca-Cola, so I started to see some of the stuff, but it
Oh,
did
great.
not hit me about, like, my Lululemon and my super cute as a personal trainer, how you look really matters, and having these cute fly outfits or, as you know, on TikTok and Instagram, it's like I've talked about how it's kind of like, this fitspiration has also gotten super sexualized. I have stepped back since then, but yeah, realizing these $200 outfits were toxic in the crotch areas, on the breast areas. This is something that women, so I haven't talked about yet, as I mentioned before we push record, and I do think you're really hitting a need, and it's also like a popular need right now as women. There is like an awakening happening when it comes to toxicity, whether
Mhm.
it's coming from all different directions, but definitely the clothing is a new thing. So I really do appreciate your advocacy. So when you started digging, you already mentioned there was a big learning curve and like not just like who you're networking with and where you're gonna source, but now just like it's not just PFAS as they call them, right?
Guys, yeah, I've heard it all.
And that's what is also known as the forever chemicals. We're seeing that issue with our food systems. We're seeing it also in the clothing, but there's formaldehyde, there's dyes, there's other different types of fibers. Is there anything that like shocked you the most about this journey, or is it specifically maybe the forever chemicals?
It was, yeah, all of the toxins, I'd have to say, the lead and the heavy metals. And then also how there is no Well, also what shocked me was how there's so little studies and research on women's bodies in general. A lot of the health studies that are out there were done on a male's body, from the medicine that we take, how it interacts with us, all of that. And then to learn also that we as women, we're cyclical beings. Our bodies are so different than a male body. So yeah, it was the toxins, it was how little research is done. And, because of the studies that were then done on these tampons, it has now prompted the FDA to study the effects of like, oh, what happens when you wear this thing inside of the most absorbent part of your body and it has lead in it? Like, what kind of health risks could come of that, if any? And I'm like, I mean, come on. Like, we wonder, unfortunately, why cancer is on the rise, why infertility, why hormone imbalance, why women are suffering with debilitating periods, which we as a society have normalized, but it is not, in fact, normal for our bodies to be suffering in this way every week, every month. So it's something that I feel very passionate about bringing a conversation to, because, I mean, what's shocking to me too is how little conversations we're having around these topics.
Well, most people like to stay surface level. That's not how we roll on Taste of Truth
Yeah,
Tuesdays. That is for sure. And no ideology is safe. We have talked about how biology is not bigotry, even though we are also accepting and on this channel as well. But I stand for that in science and research because it does matter. Because I've been advocating for the last 20 years about how little women are studied. And I'm like, well, wait a
yeah,
minute. Women are women. There are
yeah,
biological differences. Now I'm an asshole for saying that. I'm getting nervous just bringing it up. It's just not okay. It
yeah,
makes me cry too because I talk about ketogenic diets, low carb diets as performance based because a lot of the research again has not been done on women. So when people are advocating for it, I'm agnostic about a lot of things, which is why this podcast is so gray zoned. Or like we're a small audience because we're always in the gray. We don't do hot button stuff, hot takes,
yeah.
but we do try to look at all sides and understand where people are coming from. But some of the stuff there are like objective bads and these chemicals and the lack of awareness do you think there's a reason why the information is still so buried from the public? Or do you think it's because people, like I mentioned, just want to be like surface level, talk about Love is Blind, the new season, how bad it is, like whatever?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think it's that. I think that our marketing plays such a heavy role on society, which has now included like social media and these apps that we're given, has caused us to then have an even shorter attention span. So all of this combined, I think, it's what's been fascinating to me too through this journey is I learned that cycles were seen as sacred, right? Centuries ago. And around the Industrial Revolution, so 1931 ish, when things started to become mass produced and marketed, that's when a lot of this changed. And we as humans, like, because we have such limited attention span and we're so over bombarded with so many different things, my hypothesis is that we're not paying attention to it yet, but I think we're on the surface of it. Just like we'd had this like mass revolution, I feel like kind of recently within the past decade with like food, right? And how food is marketed, or an organic food, and like how you should like watch what you eat. And that woke everybody up to the fact that they were kind of like poisoning us, right? Like through all these years. And again, when things started becoming mass produced. So my hope is that our textiles, and especially for women, our menstrual products are next. But I just don't know that. I feel like we're in this like weird time period right now where we're all kind of waking up to it.
Yeah, that is the case with I was reading a book, I think it's Science Set Free by Rupert Sheldrake,
Oh
but I
yeah.
I read so many books like I mentioned, it's hard to remember, but it was like the concept of a scientific fact like ages out every 7 years because and I think that's where we're at is like it's such a new sort of truth that it takes time for big heavy truths to kind of ripple out into different phases of society. So you brought this up, and I want to dive in that we have mentioned the Body Project by historian Broomberg on the podcast before. She specifically talked about how in the 20th century, that's when marketing started to see it as something, it was like we had to hide. We had to, it was hygienic. It was something, that's when the pads and it's very interesting because the studies have been done like whatever period brand, like the pad whether it was Always or whatever it was back in the very beginning, they typically had a brand allegiance due to whatever they got when their mom, when they first got their menstrual cycle, they had this allegiance. It's so fascinating when you think about that. And so, I think historically, though, because when you talk about way back, there's a lot of interesting research about the matriarchy and different styles of matriarchy, like societies. And the Bible also, or like, just Abrahamic religions treat the period as like a ritual impurity, but so do like Indian religion. So it's been a very ancient concept too. It always makes me sad thinking about how but I do understand the sacred and impurity. I don't want to judge that, but it also makes me sad well, I'm on my period right now. So I'm like, oh, just feeling, I'm sure you're picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah.
But we also think about the red tent and the sacred ceremonies and how much more supportive we used to be as women in some societies. So I just think it's fascinating how it went from like it was a hygiene problem then almost is what I mean. It's like, so it's almost come back around. Like we are cyclical in nature, even historically, and we are cyclical in nature, even in 28-day cycles. But
Yeah.
you're trying to shift the narrative. And so that's a big thing you're trying to push. So let's recap for the listeners. And I'd like to hear from you. What is the narrative that we're trying to break? And what's the new story we're trying to tell?
Yeah. The narrative I'm trying to break is to your point that periods have become something of hygienic or that is dirty, that we need to hush hush and like put a band-aid or like a tampon in it to like ignore the fact that we are bleeding as women and just go go go. I think we live in a society that operates on a 24-hour cycle, which is very much in line with a male's hormonal cycle, right? And we as women have, I mean, at least our whole lifetimes, we've grown up thinking like this is just how we're supposed to operate, when in fact that's not normal. We should be operating like listening to our bodies at the core of it. At the end of the day, our bodies ask for different things each week depending on which phase we are in. So really learning to tune in and listen to what our body needs, because that is how we're going to operate to optimize our lives and show up as our best selves. So really just educating women around what our 4 phases are, our cycles. There's a kind of trending phase right now. Cycle syncing is something else that I learned about while on this journey, which is crazy to me because I'm in my 30s and I, as a young girl, when I first got my period and through my 20s, I didn't know what cycle syncing was. And I think that's super fascinating too, because I think if we can teach girls this when they get their periods and that we are cyclical beings and that you're going to feel different every week. And that's okay. And to optimize for that, I think that's what's going to help shift society into, just allowing women to rest when needed, especially like around our cycles and like, it's funny to me because it's like, can you imagine, like, if men bled for, like, a week every month? Like, society would probably be so different.
It is so funny. Like there's so
Yeah.
many things I want to touch on. So on Taste of Truth Tuesdays, we definitely talk a lot about the cycle, in particular body image. As a coach, I do weekly check-ins. And so I was really passionate. I've stepped back right now from coaching as much, but I would do biofeedback check-ins. So we would talk about, sleep, energy, digestion. But then we also dove into like self-talk, and I would always see cyclically their
Mhm.
body image. And I was like, and I'd also talk about their period because it's a really huge check engine light for our overall health. And again, like you said, it's been normalized to have terrible periods, and that's wrong answer. Well, depends on where I'm in perimenopause. So there's going to be some inconsistencies that might be
Sure.
normal, keeled over and lots of pain or really heavy bleeding and being anemic. Those things are,
Yeah.
something we could at least work with and support. I really try to not to be a blanket statement type of person, but
Yeah.
how much the brain changes, not just your body, but your brain as well. And so there's a book that I read, listened to on Audible called The Female Brain by, oh my gosh, Luann Brizendine, MD.
Mhm.
It's pretty easy to find, but I always wish authors would circle back around and update their books if they're 10 years or older, because especially when it comes to neuroscience and stuff like that. But it has so much awesome information. It is a little bit old, so I'm not sure how much is outdated because I'm not an expert in the field. But it was talking so much about, depression and anxiety coming on when we first start our periods and how much our brain are impacted. So the other thing I wanted to touch on when it comes to menstruation awareness in our cycle is like you can't get pregnant 30 days a month. So once you become aware, and if your cycle is consistent, which some women that's not the case, but then there's, the fertility awareness method where you can, step back off of birth control, be somewhat pretty regular and consistent with opting out of getting pregnant without using hormones, and just more education there can, I think, reduce the need for other issues that come down the road that I think, this country is really struggling on. I believe in states' rights. And so I think that makes it difficult for people who can't move. So I don't really know what to do. But if with education, because I also believe in small government, and I don't believe in I actually believe in regulation when it comes to toxins. It's a confusing world to live in, but I don't want them to tell me what to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I do think that education is key. That's why I talk about so many things, like especially with MLMs, multi-level marketing, like the government protects them now. So they're not going to regulate. We need to just kind of teach people how to see scams. And so that's kind of where I come from is education over regulation, because I'm not going to rely on the government for really anything, even though we're active duty and we're literally waiting on a paycheck. So it's like,
Yeah.
but, I understand the irony and everything I'm saying, listeners, but yeah, I do what we can. So with
Yeah.
that, I wanna hand it off that I think what you're doing is so important. You're right, that if we were when we were first getting in our cycles, do you remember being so embarrassed? I used to think that I was gonna bleed through my pad when we'd get up, these younger kids, they don't know what it's like to have to go sharpen your pencil. Um,
Yeah.
I'm 40, so I'd have to get up and, like, sharpen my pencil in front of everyone, and I was so worried that people could see me bleeding through my, pants. Did you ever worry about that when you were younger? Any worries
Def
like that?
I still, to this day, I mean, I feel like that's kind of just ingrained in us as women. Like when you stand up and like if you're on a heavy day, you check behind you, Like I feel like it's regardless of like what you're wearing too. And yeah, I think that you know, it makes me sad to hear, women struggle with such heavy flows is like a lot of like the feedback that I've gotten. And I think that kind of touches on the point that you made about how, it's really on us to take matters into our own hands with education. Because a lot of the times, and again, as unfortunately as women, we so often, look to our doctors or look to someone. It's like, can I have some answers, please? And unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of PMS related symptoms, whether it's endo, PCOS, the doctors don't have any answers. So that's why I think it's especially important for us. And like one of a big value that I'm finding I want to share as part of this brand's mission is like to reclaim your power and educate yourself. Like we have to be our own advocates. So it's like if you're struggling with like really heavy flows or like debilitating periods every month, really taking a look globally at your lifestyle. And unfortunately, in our day and age, it's really hard to live a completely non-toxic life. Like there's PFAS everywhere, even in the water. Like, but if you can start to like really narrow in, and that's why I think like period underwear is like such a great option on like, what can I change, or swap out. So for women, it's period underwear, it's our menstrual products, period underwear, it's our skincare, it's the things that are like directly absorbing into our bodies, it's nutrition, it's like our lifestyle. Like, I think like smoking is really bad for women. And I think that causes like a lot of like issues with not only like our egg health, but like our PMS and periods. So like just educating yourself holistically, like what are the best, most important things I can do to like make my life better? Yeah, I know that kinda, like, steered way away from your question of, like but, like, that leading
Not really.
into yeah, uh, kinda like what you just touched on, because, yeah, to your point of, like, yeah, we can't rely on, like, the government or, like, the doctors to, like, take care of us at the end of the day. I think we have to, like, reclaim that power back in ourselves.
Yeah, sovereignty is the way of the future. I really think so. especially for any of those of us who are I'm a rebel, I've always been more of a rebel against authority.
Yeah.
So, sovereignty, yeah, and the doctors and just being like that they work for me. I've had a thyroid issue, and so sometimes they just don't even wanna run a full thyroid panel, and they look at me like I have something on my face when I'm asking follow-up questions. It can be very difficult to advocate for yourself, and I'll typically forget, like, 5 things I wanted to say while I was in there because of
Yeah.
whatever they still even though I act like a rebel, the authority presence of a doctor is still so real, even if I
Yeah.
act guilty, it's just it affects us all. So I have now started having, like, a notepad that I have pulled up the whole time I'm in there so I don't blank out and forget, like, a little point that I want, and I also have switched practitioners who I feel a lot more she's really more open-minded and, works more holistically, which is exciting because it's hard to find that with, the healthcare. So there's a couple things I wanted to touch on. You know, you spoke about so many important topics. I really do appreciate the broad spectrum of just informing ourselves because I do try to speak about that when it comes to nutrition, but understand like economic factors matter too. And so when it comes about the non-tox lifestyle, a mantra I've always told myself, it's not what you do once in a while, it's what you do like every day or like very often. So like you said, our skincare routine we do pretty often, your makeup you probably do often, and then your period, that's every month. So it's definitely a cool thing. So before we move on, I would assume that those ladies who have really heavy periods, that an issue with your product being like just in general, any product is hard for them beside a tampon to provide the solution
Yeah.
you're looking for, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why we're trying to dive deeper than just giving you a tampon. Like, let's go to the root cause of why your periods are like this. Is that kind of how you got there?
Yeah, 100%. And, it's been really fascinating too. My data set is small, but I've talked to a good amount of women at this point who have shared, when they make the switch or they've worn the underwear, from like consistently using a tampon every single time. They notice already less cramping. There's like less of these debilitating symptoms, a lighter flow, a shorter flow and duration of how much they're bleeding. So I personally believe, and this is my opinion, but like when you allow your body to energetically release your flow, which is how it was built and what I believe it was intended to do versus shoving something inside to keep your flow in your body, I genuinely believe that really helps alleviate a lot of the symptoms.
I will not push back a single bit. I totally agree. I had from several standpoints of my life, as I mentioned, I'm 40, but I can think back to when I got out my first IUD because I
Oh,
could tell that it was really holding I was like incontinent and they didn't believe me. And I think that means like peeing yourself, right? Because that's what I was dealing.
yes. Yeah.
Sometimes I say the other thing, which means you can't get hard, which is not what I was dealing with, obviously. But anyway, I had an issue. They weren't believing me, per usual. And I was in Denver, Colorado, because I've moved a lot, and they were mad at me. They're like, the taxpayer dollar paid for you to get this IUD, and you're getting it out. And they like shunned me, and I was like, I'm doing this for my pelvic health. And I slipped and fell that same day hiking because it was January and I shouldn't have been hiking in Colorado. And I fractured my pelvis, and it was just so
Um,
my life is like that. It's like the song with Atlantis Morissette. I was just like, I was trying to celebrate pelvic health, and now I'm like literally I had to, bring that thing around that like, squishy tire thing to sit on. So I definitely understand pelvic health from lots of different
yeah.
angles. But that is another time where I felt the shift of like actually getting the IUD out and feeling my bleed happen
Oh,
and feeling that energy release was
yeah.
another huge, like, will remember that forever. I think I was like 23 or 24. And then
Yeah.
even now, as I've shifted, like as an athlete, tampons are definitely kind of can be a go to. I was in a
Yeah.
swim, I was playing soccer, I was doing bodybuilding and lots of like cardiovascular, like, anyways. So I definitely can understand pads can be very uncomfortable. And so
Yeah.
the cup, oh my gosh, I tried the Diva cup and I remember this so much. It was stuck inside me. I was screaming for my roommate and she was just outside the door being like, I can't help you. It was an awful experience. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had a bad experience or any experience with the Diva cups.
I haven't tried it. I'm too afraid. I'm like, there's no way that I'm going to put something inside of me that suctions to my inside in my vagina and then like have to like get your hand in there to like pull it out. Like, no, thank you. I
Dude,
was already energetically disturbed enough with tampons, and like
I was too. So like here I am, like so used to overriding my intuition at that point in my life where I've just like, force, that masculine energy you talked
yeah,
about, forcing
yeah,
myself through stuff. So in the book that I mentioned before we push record, well, wait, I want to here I am with my bibliotherapy. I've like have all these books out. I do want to read something from To Die For by Alden. But I did want to mention because you work with a lot of women and so who have tough period cycles, and you mentioned lack of resources and lack of support about dealing with PMS. And so this is like an older book, but man, Katharina Dalton, MD, is the author. She is
yeah.
the grandmother of PMS, and she paved the way. I mean, she helped. This is called Once a Month: Understanding and Treating PMS, and it's got this like purple and green cover, and you can get it
Okay.
used on Amazon. But Katharina Dalton, MD, is the author. But yeah, this was back in 1953. She pioneered the very first medical paper on PMS. So she is like every woman needs to like say a prayer
Yeah,
to
yeah,
Dr. Dalton for because it really was, seen as hysteria or seen as
yeah,
witchcraft, depending on what decade you were alive in. And so, yeah, this is still a newer thing to really understand the differences between PMS, PMDD. Like migraines are one of the top symptoms that women deal with. So, kind of understanding, oh, yeah, once a month I'm getting a headache. What are some supplements or some lifestyle changes I can make to reduce the headache? So, that's a really
yeah.
good course you might want to recommend, have on hand.
Cool. Thank
It
you.
has lots of charts and stuff like that, and, it is old, but I like older books. They have, like, a charm,
Yeah.
like, it's aged out.
Yeah, and you said something earlier, it may have been before we were recording, just how, like, history almost like it does there are patterns, like, it doesn't always necessarily repeat itself verbatim, but, like, there are cycles to history.
For sure. I've always been a history nerd. I mean, I grew up in Virginia where we are beating our heads about just the colonies and stuff, and now I live literally in Yorktown, Virginia, which is probably one of the most patriotic areas in the country, and so with all that, I definitely dive into it to understand the different versions of history that we're told. And so, you mentioned that you also have the book To Die For in your queue, and you've read some of it and listened to some of it on your audiobook. So it's on my recommended books
Yeah,
on the website. So here's a little thing I highlighted just in the intro. So at least 40,000 chemicals are used commercially worldwide, yet only a small percentage of them have been checked for human and animal safety. So I've been doing research even just in the products that are used in our dog toys because you mentioned
mhm,
earlier about now they're just studying what happens when we have clothing and lead. And so when it comes to PFAS, the PFAS, these forever chemicals in our clothing, it seems like they release their toxins with friction and heat. And so as an athlete, when am I generating friction and heat? Oh, when I'm exercising. So every time I'm exercising in my Lululemons, I was for sure getting sweaty, so my pores were open. So it's guaranteed getting toxins in the skin. So that's another study that's not mentioned
yeah,
here, but fascinating stuff, alarming stuff. And
yeah,
she mentions right here that you mentioned in the very beginning that made me think of this line about when you were navigating the textile industries and the textures. And she says that there's only these faintest clues that you can find like this maybe a weird odor or like a very bright color or like a plastically hand feel because that's kind of the next question I wanted to go to as we're getting closer to the end of the hour, and I want to respect your time as our entrepreneur crushing it in the LA zone. Let's talk about greenwashing in the wellness theater because it's breast cancer awareness month, and is that not just throwing up red flags with the pink stuff, like it's pink washing this month, but all right, there goes some books. Okay, so it's clean, it's eco-friendly, it's non-toxic. So, I'd love to hear a couple things like how you are always avoiding these fast fashion shortcuts as you've been an entrepreneur navigating this, but also how do you spot like when a brain is full of it? Can you give us a tip or clue, some really big giveaways?
yeah. I think that going back to what we were just saying about how it really is the onus is on us as consumers and women in general to do our own due diligence. I do think that over the last only decade, it has gotten easier to really spot these brands. And I attribute that to social media. And that's one of the reasons I'm thankful for social media, because we now at our fingertips have so much education, so much awareness of brands, right? I think that prior to that, we were really reliant on these uh massive companies, brands to like buy our goods from, who they were mass producing because they wanted to sell it to us for the cheapest price. They wanted to get the cheapest price while also making a profit. So like we were in this weird time where we were at the mercy of these larger brands. But now, me as a consumer, like I personally, I don't buy from a brand or any of my products really unless I know where it's coming from. I love social media because I love following other founders. I love small brands who are making a promise to do good, who like share their story, right? Of like how I made this and like why I'm doing this. Because again, I think unfortunately, with such little regulation from the government, a lot of bigger brands, they can say like organic or sustainable or eco-friendly, but there's so many like, workarounds to like being able to put that label on something that unfortunately you just can't trust it. You can't trust that messaging alone. So the responsibility is really on you as a consumer. And I think that we're in a time when a lot of people are coming around to wanting better quality goods for themselves. It does make me sad. Unfortunately, you still see like a decent amount of like fast fashion hauls on like Instagram and TikTok, and like people who are just like, wearing these brands. To your point, Lululemon, like they recently got in trouble because people found out like what it's made of. And like, yeah, you're absorbing these products like when you're wearing them most. So yeah, I think that, for me, it's just like I do my own due diligence when I wanna use my money to support people who are doing good better, or trying to do better for the world, the planet, and for our bodies.
Yeah, our vote is our dollar is our biggest vote, and I felt
Yes.
that way for a long time. So
Yeah.
do you know cancel Ian Carroll? He is like a YouTuber streamer,
No,
Ian
I don't.
Carroll. So you gotta find him on TikTok and on YouTubes.
Yeah,
He does like conspiracy theories, but
right.
he's like fact-based and cares very much about what he puts out there for sure, and he doesn't paid for by anybody, which is definitely a big concern right now from foreign countries influencing folks.
Yeah,
He just launched an app called Buyer App. It's Buyr, and it's helping folks. He got huge on TikTok by going down the aisles and looking at like who owns this brand and being like literally highlighting them and showing folks it's like 3 companies. It's BlackRock basically who owns all of that, and teaching people, these companies, who they are, how much they own, how much private equity is taking over everything from your vet office to your dentist office. So that's a big thing in my world and in some of the circles I follow, and so I love giving resources to folks.
made a note. Yeah,
There's a fatigue here as well, like, I mentioned, the government shutdown right now, no one's getting paychecks. Food stamps are gonna run out next month, so some people might have bigger problems on their plate, and you
no.
also might get, like, fatigue of being like, "Oh my gosh, is this really coming at me from every angle possible?" I feel like there is a cabal that's actually actively trying to kill me at this point, you know what I mean? Like, you start to turn into
Yeah,
a tinfoil hat person being like, the toxins aren't. So I can understand if anyone's listening where you feel panicked or overwhelmed or discouraged or fatigued. I just wanted to touch on any of those feelings because I think we all feel like that when we're navigating this stuff. Like you said, we can't ever live a truly non-toxic life, and no one really ever has. Like, back when it comes to history of textile stuff, we used to do really toxic things to our clothes. We asbestos and lead in the paint. Like, there's always been something some generation has been trying to overcome. So I try to just like pump myself up with some of that. You got anything to add in that?
yeah. No, I think that you kind of covered it all beautifully, and do what we can. And look, my message, although I feel like sometimes I hate that it might come off as alarmist, like I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I really just like want to educate women on what we've been using and why my products are made better. And yeah, that's all I can do.
Yeah, so let's talk about your product as we're closing down the interview because I mentioned I haven't purchased them yet. Looking forward to it. It looks so soft, and
Yeah.
softness is something that I really love. It's really hard to get that without like super synthetic stuff. So tell me
Yes.
a bit more about like what to expect with your products, some of your best sellers,
Yeah.
and really anything else that's like giving you hope, whether it's in your
Yeah.
work or something you've experienced in the culture, like talking with podcasters like me, like anything you've experienced. Or, and I like to end on a good note, but sometimes there isn't one, and that's okay.
No. Well, we can try to because I can explain like my product. My best seller was the thong that I launched with, and it is made of a tencel modal. Tencel is a fabric that's derived from trees, and where I specifically sourced my tencel from comes from a fabric mill that is extremely ethical in their processes of how they create it. It's extremely sustainable, and they are certified, with Europe's level of like certification, which is like certainly like certain like green flags that I look for when I'm buying clothing now. And let me tell you, I made 5 different samples of like the body of the underwear because when I first started, I was using a Supima cotton, which was great. But as I kept learning again about textiles, like I just kept sourcing new fabric and I wanted to make it the best possible. So I landed on a Tencel modal. And then the gusset, which is the crotch area of the underwear, which is what allows it to be absorbent and hold your flow in, is made of 3 separate fabrics, 3 different layers. There's a top layer that's designed to keep you cool, dry, it's moisture wicking. There's a middle absorbent layer, which is 20 times more absorbent than hemp, cotton, terry, other like typical fabrics that are used in period underwear and underwear in general. And then there's a bottom waterproof layer. And I'm so proud of all of those fabrics because they're completely non-toxic. The waterproof layer is made without using a lot of the toxic solvents that you see a lot of standard waterproof or athletic wear made of. So again, I was like very meticulous about that. And because the thong was such a good seller, people love this Tencel when people feel it. If you have never felt Tencel before, it is so silky, soft, better than cotton, in my opinion. It's very breathable. So it's like thin where it needs to be. And then again, having the absorbent part thin was very important to me as somebody who had worn other brands of period underwear. What I hated most was like then it does require more care when washing it. And it was always a pain to have these huge, like bulky underwear in the shower and rinsing it. So like mine is like so thin and nice. Anyways, so because everybody loved the thong so much, I iterated on that. I made a brief, so like a full bottom and then a boxer style. I've learned some women are like their thongs, some don't. So like I just want to continue iterating on the Tencel, I think, because I love the messaging around it. I love the feel. I love how it's wearing. It's designed to withstand at least 300 washes. So it replaces a great amount of having to just, go to the store and purchase new disposables. So there's a lot of benefits to it that I write about on my website. My hope, obviously, is to also get the price down eventually because I produce in small batches in Los Angeles. And because I'm using top quality materials, I'm still, unfortunately, I don't have a ton of margin. I'm giving it to you at the best price that I can while also enough to like put everything back into the business. But the ultimate goal is to obviously scale and, I'm very aware that it looks like an investment up front. It is. But I can guarantee that, I haven't bought tampons and pads in years. So at the end of the day, and then with how it's holding up, it's definitely one of the best products I believe that I've created to like manage our cycles.
Yeah, you should be like, super stoked and really proud of your journey and this product. It looks really soft on the website. I could see that immediately and I'm drawn to it and just want to definitely experience that for myself. And then I was a competitive bodybuilder athlete, and as I've been healing my cycle, which was drastically impacted by being on the IUD for 10 years and for
Yeah.
starving myself and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I've gained weight, and I think there's a lot going on there, and that's something I don't talk about, but it's very, very, very difficult for someone that's been an athlete, a dancer, a circus performer my whole life. And so my thighs rubbing together actually impact the period
Yeah.
situation you have going on now.
Yeah.
So it does sound like with that thick pad stuff can be very uncomfortable because I am still walking and exercising and just dealing with the uncomfortability of the weight gain. And so that's something I deal with. It's hard for me to be physically active currently on my period with what I'm using. So it is a need, I think, that you're meeting with finding that comfortability, because cotton is typically what I go to for non-toxic, but it's really like not that comfortable, especially when it comes to athletic wear. All my has a little bit of elastin in it, maybe 5%, which is my wiggle room, just so I can try not to feel like I'm wearing cardboard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So is there any, I feel like we touched on everything that I made notes to touch on. Is there anything you want to say? Like, the big thing we didn't touch on was something that happened semi recently, the Thinks Period scandal.
Yeah,
We talked a lot about Lululemon, but like
yeah.
they make some undergarments, but were you involved in that? Have you talked to any of the folks that were in the class action settlements or lawsuits, or have you networked with any of those folks?
Yeah, I have not talked to anyone, well, directly. I knew a lot of women who were wearing that product who don't now because of this lawsuit. And look, here's my stance on it. It was funny because that was all like coming out around the beginning of like me ideating this concept and everything.
Right.
And I get um, how PFAS were found in their products because unfortunately PFAS are in so many products. So like that, I honestly I feel for them because like a lot of the times it's not easy to get around that. However, I think where they got in trouble was marketing that it was non-toxic and like sustainable, like natural, and like you can't do that if you're going to use PFAS. With that being said, I that was another reason why I was like, I'm going to find fabric that I can test and it will come back certified free against that. Um, I think that there are certain things you can learn to look for too. Like if there's any sort of like poly in the ingredients or fabrics, like you're probably going to have like some sort of chemicals in the underwear. So again, just kind of like taking the onus to like learn what those red flags are, to look for it and to try to wear products that aren't made with that.
Yeah, that's helpful, because reading labels is something we talk a lot about in regards to breaking out of the calories in, calories out model, just understanding there's a lot more about food than just the nutrition label, even though that is a good start. And so just looking at the labels of your clothing, it's just so overwhelming how much is made of fake, like
I know.
polyester. And so going to vintage stores and resale clothing can be a
Yeah.
really great way to find stuff from just a couple decades ago where fast fashion and this innovation cycle of all these new chemicals hasn't wasn't like as popular. But you mentioned your website where you write. You also mentioned before we push record that you recently started a Substack. So I'll have all that linked in the show notes. You don't have to like spell anything out for us, but
Yeah.
I'm excited for you. So that's where a good place for our listeners can go if they want to like, learn more about you or learn more about your advocacy and the awareness that you're spreading. Is there anything else
Yeah.
like your socials, TikTok, Instagram, all of them?
Yeah. Yeah, please. I will give those to you and would so
Right.
appreciate any links. But yeah, my website is flowergirl.co. The Instagram is the same. It's at flowergirl.co with an underscore at the end. And yeah, if anybody DMs the Instagram, you can also find me at Arielle Loupos. I'm so happy to like continue this conversation. Literally any questions you have, whether it's around textiles, your cycle, the product itself, like anything. I love talking about all of this.
Yeah, this was wonderful. I really appreciate all the topics. We kind of went everywhere. And thanks everybody for
Yeah.
listening.
Thank you so much.